I am Dr. Chedian from 1976 batch, quite an old person. I am now practicing nephrologist in Coimbatore. The topic we have chosen is a quite interesting topic. Uh, Student days, we may not be giving much importance for the sodium and other things, except for some few questions and especially some MCQs. Always your NET PG exam will have some questions on sodium, hyponatremia. But it is a very common disorder, so you should know something about it, how to approach it. It's a little tough topic to understand, but I try to make it simple from what you know, plus I will add some few points. Now serum sodium, normally it is somewhere around 140. So generally we say the sodium value is 136 to 144. This is the most common cation, it's a cation and extracellular fluid. It is the one which maintains the extracellular volume as well as the intravascular volume. We know intravascular volume is the one which maintains the blood pressure. So to maintain blood pressure, is sodium has to be there. So a reduction in sodium below 136, we call it as hyponatremia. Now, what is meant by hyponatremia? Hyponatremia, literally, if you take hypo means low, natremia nat for sodium, so low sodium. So it means there is sodium deficit in the body. So probably you treat it with sodium. So it will look like soap. But when you go into it, depth of it, it is not true. The hyponatremia is not just sodium deficit. It is basically, it is more of, you have more water than the sodium in the body. Because of the more water, the sodium level is low. So it is more related to a water metabolism rather than sodium metabolism. So in other words, our topic today on hyponatremia, we will be talking more about water, what is the normal water, how body handles water, how kidney handles water, and really what happens in hyponatremia and how we are going to correct it. And if you don't correct it, what are the problems we are going to have? So an individual with low sodium, in other words, hyponatremia, need not have a low sodium. They may have low sodium, generally what we call it as hypovolemic hyponatremia. Sometimes they may have normal sodium, that is a very big population, that is what we call it as euvolemic hyponatremia. Some of the people, in fact, they have more sodium in their body, but disproportionately higher water content, so they present as hypervolemia. So hyponatremia means you have more water when compared with sodium, which can be normal, less, or sometimes even high. Now just we will see what are the way in which the water is being handled in the body. Normally, you drink around 1 to 1.5 liter of water, you take it orally. Your cellular metabolism adds on to 350 to 500. We will have it as 500 here, we will have it as 1.5 here. Added. Totally, you will have 2 liter of water is being added to your body fluid compartment. We know 60% of the body weight is made up of water. Of that, 2/3 is intracellular compartment, 1/3 in the extracellular compartment. Constantly, the water is shifted from one compartment to other. Normally, the water is excreted by so many means. A small amount in stools, roughly around 100 ml in a day. Sweat, depending on the climate. In a pleasant climate, it may be just 100 ml, but sometimes it may be even more, or in a very hot sultry climate, it may go in liters. Lungs will account for around 300 ml of insensible loss of water. So roughly in a day, we will be losing 500 ml of water. So remaining water, whatever you have taken, has to come out of the kidney. Of that, the sweat is the one, depending on the climatic change, it may become very much increased or very much less. Depending on that, kidney has to tune it to either to increase urine output or decrease urinary output. In other words, absorb more water or absorb little less water. Now kidney, we know the structure of the kidney. Basically, it is made up of nephron. We have got 2 types of nephron. One is called as cortical nephron, other is called as juxtamedullary nephron. This juxtamedullary nephron is very important as well as this electrolyte and water balance is concerned, because it has got a very long loop and they are the one where the counter current mechanisms happen, and they are the most important thing. Now we will see how normally kidney handles water. Normally, kidney water is freely filtered to the level of glomerulus along with a lot of solutes. So when they pass through the proximal convoluted tubule, roughly 2/3 of the solutes are absorbed, like sodium and other things are absorbed. Similarly, water is also almost 2/3 of water is absorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. Then they enter into the loop of Henle, descending limb. In the descending limb, only water is being removed. Solutes are not absolutely removed at the descending limb. So it naturally makes it more and more concentrated. Normally, the serum plasma osmolality is around 290 milliosmol per liter. So in proximal convoluted tubule, since both solute and water are absorbed equally, there is not much change in the osmolality. So when they enter into the loop of Henle, they enter at the osmolality of say around 290, 300. But as they pass through the descending limb, you find only water is being reabsorbed. So finally, it leads on to the concentrated filtrate, so which reaches as much as 1200 milliosmol per liter when they come towards the tip of the loop of Henle. Again, when they go back to the ascending limb, this ascending limb is impermeable to water. So that is very important. This place, there are a lot of mechanisms happens. In the level of thick ascending limb, you have got sodium potassium 2 chloride channel, which constantly absorbs sodium, but water is not absorbed. So urine gets slowly, it becomes 1200 milliosmol, it becomes less, it becomes to 500, 300 and so on. When they reach distal convoluted tubule, early part of the distal tubule, there is sodium chloride co-transporter. That is the one which also continue to remove sodium. But again, this is also not permeable to water. So this is what we call it as a diluting segment. What we mean by diluting segment is from 300 milliosmols, it goes down further, almost it goes up to 50 milliosmol per liter, depending on the sodium and other solute absorption. So this is called as diluting segment. That is the early part of the proximal convoluted tubule. Of course, the concentrating segment is the descending limb of the loop of the Henle. But of course, the ascending limb also is impermeable to water, so it is diluting. But below the normal plasma osmolality, that is the one which happens in the early part of the convoluted tubule. Then this diluted urine, they come and enter into the collecting duct. In the collecting duct, water can be absorbed if the channels are fully open, because the medullary interstitium will have high osmolality. You will find the maximum osmolality of 1200 in the tip of the pyramid. But of course, in the base it will be less, but they are all more than plasma osmolality. So water can easily absorb if the channels are open. If the channels are closed, then the water gets more and more excreted. So the water handling by the kidney, by the nephron is 2/3 absorbed in the proximal convolute. Since it is along with the solute, no problem. Then descending limb is the concentrating segment. Then the ascending limb, it starts getting diluted. But once into the proximal convolute, they become more diluted, come to the 50 milliosmols. If there is no absolute reabsorption of water in collecting duct, you can have a urine with as low as 50 milliosmol per liter. Practically, we will have somewhere around 100 milliosmol per liter. But if you have maximum concentration of substances which are going to reabsorb water, you will have a concentrated urine. The concentrated urine can go up to 1200. What really concentrates the urine is the hormone called antidiuretic hormone, which will block the channels. Now coming to the water diuresis, you must have three factors. We said how water can be eliminated. One is the ADH secretion must be suppressed, because with ADH, antidiuretic hormone, more and more water can be reabsorbed at the level of collecting duct. It has to be suppressed. But that alone is not sufficient. You should have sufficient water and sodium which should reach this segment. For example, somebody with a severe hypotension or with severe acute renal failure, when there is filtration itself is very low, nothing much comes here. So there is no fine tuning happens at the level of collecting duct. So there should be sufficient water and sodium should reach the diluting segment. Then the nephron segment should function normally. That means, as I said earlier, the descending limb should concentrate, ascending should dilute, and so on and so on. So if you have a thing which when the antidiuretic hormone are present in where it's very much suppressed, the water cannot be reabsorbed from the collecting duct. The water starts getting diluted. I mean, the urine gets diluted and you pass a dilute urine. So if you plot it in a graph, suppose you take 100 ml gets filtered at the level of glomerulus. You will take this is the glomerulus. In the proximal tubule, 2/3 get absorbed, say 70% get reabsorbed. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, the osmolality doesn't change, it remains at 290 because are absorbed in equal proportion. Then only 30 ml reaches the distal part of the, it comes to the loop of Henle. In the loop of Henle, as I said, it gets concentrated and around 10% of the water is reabsorbed at the level of descending limb of loop of Henle. You get a maximum concentration somewhere around 1200 in the tip of the loop of the Henle. Then in the ascending limb, it gets again diluted. It comes to 300 290 milliosmol. Then it gets further diluted. No water absorption. So the water level is same 20. Then it comes here. When you have no ADH, no antidiuretic hormone, so the water is further excreted as such as a very diluted urine. It can go up to theoretically up to 16 ml. That is out of 100 what is filtered, it goes almost 16 ml can get excreted. In a day we get almost 180 liters of urine getting filtered. So you can imagine so much is can be eliminated from the body. But in other case where you have a maximal concentration of antidiuretic hormone, the water is continued to be reabsorbed. From 20 ml almost it is reabsorbed to 2 ml at the level of collecting duct. As it passes through the collecting duct, it gets more and more concentrated. Finally, you leave only 0.3 ml of urine out of 100 ml which gets filtered at the level of glomerulus. So that means you can have almost 99.7% of water glomerular filtered which is reabsorbed, which is filtered can be reabsorbed if you have maximal antidiuretic hormone. If you don't have antidiuretic hormone, you can almost eliminate almost 15% of the glomerular filtration rate. So this is the main beauty of the collecting duct and the ADH. Now, how does this ADH act? It is ADH is otherwise called as arginine vasopressin. It has got a receptor in the principal cells of the collecting duct. So where they join with that, with the help of G protein, they act on the cyclic AMP protein kinase pathway, which will start releasing aquaporin. Aquaporin normally they are present in the vesicle. So this vesicle slowly get exocytosis, get inserted. Aquaporin 2 channels gets exerted in the luminal border. So from the luminal borders, because of the aquaporin, water gets reabsorbed from the luminal border into the cells, and from there they come to the bloodstream and it is absorbed. So the water is present in the collecting duct lumen. The aquaporin channels are inserted, which allows the free passage of water into the cell, because inside the tubular cell the osmolality is higher, 600 milliosmol. It is 300 milliosmol outside. If you take it as the urine is isosmotic or the filtrate is isosmotic, then from there it gets through the aquaporin 2 channels which are present in the other side basal membrane. Then they get into the interstitial fluid, and from there they go to the ascending limb of vasa recta. Ascending limb of vasa recta will have high osmolality because of it allows the passage of solutes. So the vasa recta is highly will have high milliosmolality, so the water gets absorbed and gets eliminated. So this is the pathway. This is the vasopressin receptor. So the vasopressin is the one which plays a role, a very important role in the removal of the water. Now we will go to the clinical features. So far we just brushed up our physiology. Now we will go into the clinical features. Now by definition, plasma sodium less than 135, we can call it as hyponatremia. But most of the patients with hyponatremia, they are all asymptomatic. Sometimes on routine investigation, you may find there is some changes in the plasma sodium. Many people are not symptomatic. So only when it comes below 130 or up to 125, people will start having symptoms if it occurs very slowly. But in a post-op setup or in a hospitalized patient where the sodium changes occurs very rapidly, you may find symptoms even at a higher level. So anything below 135, you cannot ignore, you have to be careful. But as it goes low down, you may have more problem. It is, as I said earlier, it is mainly due to water retention. Before analyzing a patient on hyponatremia, before approaching or what they are having, two conditions you have to rule out. One is what you call it as pseudo hyponatremia. This is you have low sodium reading, but if they check the osmolality is normal, 290. This happens typically in severe hyperlipidemia, especially hypertriglyceridemia. Somebody's triglyceride is 1000, 2000 and so on, they may have problem. Hyperproteinemia, they have high protein, especially patient with multiple myeloma, they may have a very high globulin. So because their serum protein will be 9, 10 and so on, they may have low sodium. So before labeling it somebody as hyponatremia, first rule out pseudohyponatremia. Two important conditions to remember is hyperlipidemia and hyperproteinemia. Next, produces low sodium, but if you correct the primary, it will be all right. For example, somebody on mannitol, say somebody with a trauma or CVA post-op, you give mannitol, you check serum sodium at the time, you will find it is low. But once the mannitol action is over, you will find the sodium comes back to normal. You need not specifically treat it. Similarly, after a heavy ethanol consumption or after a methanol or even with severe hyperglycemia, you control the blood sugar. Every 100 milligram blood sugar rise, the sodium will come down by 1.8 or 2 milliequivalent. So you correct the sugar, the sodium will come back to normal. So this is what we call as translocal hypertension. It also you need not break your head and try to analyze. Now, before going into the further approach, you should know something about the osmolality. So osmolality is because of the osmotically active substances of all the substances in the as per the water, milliosmol per kilogram of water. That is what we say. Normal plasma osmolality is around 290. The osmolality of the plasma can be done by two methods. One is what we call it as direct method, where you have to use a technique called depression of the freezing point. Or you can calculate the plasma osmolality by using a formula 2 into plasma sodium plus you use blood glucose level divided by 18 because molecular weight of glucose is 180. Similarly, urea in milligram per deciliter divided by 6 because molecular weight of urea is 60. So this is a formula which you can use if you can't do the direct osmolality, but direct osmolality is more accurate. Now, normally the plasma osmolality, how it is maintained? Normally the plasma osmolality is 290. It is basically maintained by the hypothalamus pituitary axis. Pituitary, posterior pituitary produce a hormone by name vasopressin. So which is secreted whenever the osmolality changes. So when the osmolality, even 1% rise of the osmolality, immediately IDH is secreted and it try to retain more and more water, dilute the blood and bring down the plasma osmolality. Similarly, plasma ADH also can be secreted whenever you have a severe volume depletion. Basically, ADH secretion is under the control of osmoreceptors. But sometimes you have severe volume depletion. You constantly, the baroreceptors from carotid and other areas, they constantly send impulse to the hypothalamus through that to the posterior pituitary. Thereby, a severe sudden loss in volume depletion, the ADH secretion is increased to retain more water. Of course, you have to retain more sodium, that is done by the renin-angiotensin mechanism. But water also has to be retained because unless water is retained, sodium and water are retained, you can't maintain a blood volume. So any volume depletion can directly stimulate ADH secretion. Similarly, whenever there is a slight rise in osmolality, the ADH secretion is produced. One more thing which also maintain osmolality is the thirst. Normally, when the osmolality is increased, you have thirst mechanism. You feel like drinking more water, so the osmolality will come back to normal. So these are the two mechanisms which plays a role in maintaining the plasma osmolality. So whenever there is a increased plasma osmolality or a decrease in arterial volume, you have increased test, you will take more water, the water is retained in the body. Similarly, it also increases the antidiuretic hormone secretion, which acts in the collecting duct of the kidney. So thereby it reabsorbs more and more water. So it also causes water retention. Once the water is retained, you will find the plasma osmolality will slowly come down from 290. Suppose it has gone to 300, 310 because of ADH secretion and more water reabsorption plus more thirst, more drinking water. So all these things will bring down the osmolality back to 290. Once the osmolality comes back to normal, ADH secretion is suppressed and it will allow more water to get eliminated from the body. So similarly, the opposite is whenever there is a decrease in osmolality, the reverse happens. So there is a decrease in thirst, you don't feel like drinking water. There is a decreased ADH secretion. So that means more water is excreted. Again, the osmolality comes back to normal. So the problem of hyponatremia will come when there is a disorder in dilution of water or in water intake. So mostly it is because of the dilution of water. So what are the factors which can lead on to hyponatremia? Sorry, before that we will just finish up the why hyponatremia is important. The hyponatremia, the osmolality is reduced. Of course, if it is corrected by the mechanism already what we have described, it's fine. But suppose if it is not corrected, then what happens? It can cause edema of all the tissues in the body because osmolality means more water in the circulation or ECF. So it can slowly go into the ICF compartment. The most important organ which is likely to be affected will be the brain. So once it goes into the brain, there is a cerebral edema. The brain starts swelling, gets slight swelling. So early stages, you get some mild symptoms like headache, nausea, vomiting, anorexia. But as the symptom gets worsened, you will feel like muscle weakness, confusion, ataxia. You may have other symptoms like hiccup and so on. When it becomes very severe, it produces drowsiness, it can produce convulsion, it can lead on to coma and even death. So that is a problem with hyponatremia. So symptoms are basically because of cerebral edema. It can be mild, moderate or severe. When it is severe, it can even result in death. Now what really causes these symptoms? One, severity of the hyponatremia. Severe the hyponatremia, you should have more symptoms. That is logical. So somebody with a sodium of 130 will have less symptom and compared with 125, you should have more symptom and compared with 120 and so on. But more often it is because of the rapidity in which hyponatremia develops. That is, suppose the hyponatremia develops very rapidly. In other words, the brain could not adapt for that low osmolality. You start getting symptoms. So the symptoms of hyponatremia happens when you develop hyponatremia acutely, where even a mild change can produce symptoms or even dangerous complication like death. But if it is occurring slowly, you may not have much symptoms even when the sodium comes down to, even we have seen patients with 100, 110 without any symptom if they occur slowly as what you call as chronic hyponatremia. So this is what happens in the brain when you have normal sodium. This is a normal one. You know the brain volume. So brain is kept in a closed compartment. The skull is a closed compartment. So brain cannot keep on expanding like what you have in hepatomegaly. Liver, we will say 2 inches below costal margin, 5 inches and so on, so on. Spleen enlarges so much because they all have spaces. But brain does not have space, so it cannot swell very rapidly. So in a normonatremia, yes, no problem. The moment you start having acute hyponatremia, suddenly the sodium comes down to very low level. The water starts entering into the brain. You get brain edema. The swelling of the brain becomes more increased. So it gets compressed by the skull. So the people have to survive. So what is the defense mechanism against this cerebral edema? Whenever the water starts entering, because brain intracellular osmolality is more than the plasma osmolality, which has gone down very rapidly. So the brain has to reduce the osmolality inside. So how it can do? It starts pushing out the electrolytes. So brain neuronal cells and other cells, they have more potassium. They also have some amount of sodium and other chloride and so on and so on. So first thing is whenever there is a cerebral edema, the brain starts pushing out the electrolytes. By pushing out the electrolytes, it tries to maintain or it tries to prevent the entry of water. For example, initially the brain osmolality is 290, plasma is 290. It has become 270. So now water wants to get in. So brain also pushes out sodium, potassium, chloride and so. So it also tries to bring it somewhere around 270 so that the water does not come in. You don't develop a cerebral edema. This is the first thing to happen when there is a sudden drop in the osmolality. But it cannot go on for a long time because you cannot push out all the electrolytes and other things because otherwise their activity will come to standstill. So next they start pushing out some substances called osmolytes. Like electrolyte, we have got certain osmotically active substance which we call it as osmolytes. Some of the substances I will mention in the next slide. So the brain starts pushing out osmolytes. It takes some time for it to push out the osmolytes, but it can push out osmolytes so that if the hyponatremia is occurring little slow, so brain can still adapt and it can push out the osmolyte and they can prevent the cerebral edema. So in somebody with a chronic hyponatremia, when the hyponatremia has happened over a period of time very slowly, So the brain will not have edema, but it will have less sodium, less potassium, less osmolalite there to prevent the entry of water. So the first substances on the left side, the white column is what you call as electrolytes, sodium, mainly the potassium is pushed out, sodium chloride is pushed out. Then it starts pushing out osmotic lactic substance like urea. Urea is also present inside the cell. Urea is present in both extracellular as well as intracellular component. Glutamate, inositol, taurine, and so many other substances. They are also pushed out. So by that, the brain try to adapt. So what is the importance of this particular mechanism? This is very important as far as you are going to manage this patient. So the management of patient will be more rapid if they are very symptomatic. Usually this happens in an acute setting, or in a severe hyponatremia. If they are symptomatic, probably you are really treating, but don't vigorously treat a patient. If you vigorously treat a patient, you can get into certain complications, which we will describe later. So now how will you approach clinically? How will you approach hyponatremia? Somebody, you see the report, patient has got a sodium of 125, you become a physician, you go to, you are asked for an opinion. There somebody's sodium is 128. You are asked to ask for opinion. So first thing is, you have to assess the extracellular fluid volume status. The volume status means that is whether the patient is euvolemic, hypovolemic, or hypervolemic. Hypervolemia is very easy. You find they are having edema, they have puffiness of face. Some of them are even breathless. Sometimes they may have ascites, they may have effusion. So generally hypervolemia is easily you can identify. Classical cases will be congestive cardiac failure, cirrhosis liver, nephrotic syndrome. You know, you have seen all these type of patients. They will have volume overload. Easily you can pick up. Next is hypovolemic hyponatremia. Somebody is volume depleted. How will you pick up? Usually we clinically, if you take it, we take it as sunken eyes, tongue is dry. So skin turgor is lost. So especially in the upper limb, upper extremity, if you pinch the skin, it's not going down. So these are things which will help you to assess the, it will tell you somebody is hypovolemic. Of course, usually they will have hypotachycardia. And of course, if you see the blood pressure, it will be low. So these are something which will help you to pick up a hypovolemic hyponatremia. Of course, sometimes if the patient looks otherwise healthy, you find no edema, no dehydration, BP is normal. So they will come under the category euvolemic hyponatremia. So whenever you see a patient with hyponatremia, first thing is make sure whether it is hypovolemic, hypervolemic, or it is just euvolemic. First, we will take up hypovolemic hyponatremia. Normally, we said hyponatremia means less water. I am saying body has got more water. So in hypovolemic hyponatremia, you find the patient's body sodium is low. The reasons I will tell you. The body sodium is low. They also have low water, but the sodium is much lower than that of the water. That's why the serum level is less. So they have got again more water when compared with sodium, but they have got both water and sodium depletion. That means they have lost sodium and water through either through kidney or through other route. If they have lost through the kidney, classically happens with diuretic, especially long-term use of loop diuretic, but much more commonly thiazide diuretic. Then the mineralocorticoid deficiency, Addison disease and so on. There are some kidney disease like salt-losing nephropathy. Then there is one condition called as cerebral salt wasting disease, cerebral salt wasting. That happens following a trauma or post-op after brain surgery. After a CVA, we were bedridden for a long time, you will find this type of abnormality. So their osmostatic is altered so that they lose more salt in the urine. That is called as cerebral salt wasting syndrome. So all these conditions, there is a renal loss. If you check the urine for spot sodium, it will be more than 20 milliequivalent per liter. But if there is a loss is through other areas, like somebody has got severe GI loss, vomiting and diarrhea. So they lose more water, they also lose much more sodium, then you get hyponatremia. Kidney try to conserve sodium, he try to reabsorb, that's why you find the urine sodium is less than 20 milliequivalent per liter. But still, the sodium is lost through the other route, so they have got low sodium. The burns, it is through the loss of interstitial fluid through in burns. Patient with trauma losing blood and other things, third space loss. Patient with pancreatitis, third space loss. So all these conditions, you get hypovolemic condition in which you also have hyponatremia. Hypervolemic hyponatremia, as I said earlier, this patient, even though they have hyponatremia, overall their body sodium is more. So even though they have hyponatremia, low sodium level in the body, because of more water. Total body sodium in the body is very high. Classical 3 condition where you get hypervolemic hyponatremia is congestive cardiac failure, cirrhosis liver, and nephrotic syndrome. If you check the urine sodium, because of the reduction, the effective arterial blood volume, their sodium is less. The kidney try to conserve more sodium even though they have got already volume over, because effective arterial blood volume is low. That means renal plasma flow is low. So kidney does not understand that this individual is having edema. It continues to reabsorb sodium and water. So this is classically happened with hypervolemic hyponatremia. Patient with renal failure, because of the tubular damage, they may lose sodium in the urine. But very rarely you find patient with renal failure per se causing volume overload. Most of the time, chronic renal failure, they have volume depletion or euvolemic. Next, the big category, that is what we call as euvolemic hyponatremia, in which you find the patient or otherwise clinically looks normal. They go for the routine lab investigation. They are on regular follow-up. They come with a low sodium level. That is one possible. Or a patient who is already admitted undergoing treatment suddenly deteriorates. A patient in the oncology ward or in the stroke ward suddenly becomes bad. It's not explained by the neurological findings. So you ask for electrolyte, you find that sodium is low. So we may have a patient with euvolemic hyponatremia where the body sodium is normal, but they have got excess water. So generally these people will have urinary sodium is more than 20. Whenever you see euvolemic hyponatremia, two hormonal conditions you should rule out. One is hypothyroidism, one is glucocorticoid deficiency. That is a reduction in the serum cortisol level and reduction in the serum T3, T4 and high TSH. So hypothyroidism, hypocortisolism, there is a reduction in the glucocorticoid deficiency. In these two conditions, there is a resetting of the osmoreceptor in the brain. So because of the resetting is altered, the body tries to maintain the lower osmolality. So these are the two clinical conditions. You specifically you have to investigate by doing serum TSH at least, or if possible thyroid function test plus serum cortisol level. Especially the patient had a history of asthma or some chronic skin disease where they might have taken over-the-counter steroid, or they might have been prescribed some steroids long-term by some consultant. So when they have discontinued this drug, they can have problem. Thyroid patient, they may be diagnosed for the first time. Very often it is a known thyroid patient discontinuing drugs for few months, then they are coming with the problem. So hypothyroid and hypocortisolism, you must rule out whenever you find somebody with euvolemic hyponatremia. Then when you look into the other causes, the most important thing what you should look for is the syndrome of inappropriate ADH. Stress, this was especially noted in an immediate post-op period, especially somebody's immediate post-op period, given morphine. Morphine also can produce hyponatremia. Patient was given wrong IV fluid. Instead of giving saline, suppose you keep on giving 5% X dose or often as, you may develop hyponatremia, especially in the second post-op period. If you have not chosen your IV fluids properly, you may get acute hyponatremia. Stress is one of the important factors in that particular setting. A long list of drugs can produce euvolemic hyponatremia. Then we will talk something about the SAADH. The drugs associated, the commonest drug to have hyponatremia will be thiazide diuretic, no doubt about it. Because as I said earlier, thiazide acts in the early part of the distal glandular tubule. That is the diluting segment for the kidney. Whenever you get hyponatremia, kidney should produce dilute urine. To produce dilute urine, your diluting segment should be intact. It should be acting intact. When somebody is on thiazide diuretic for a long time, the diluting segment is blunted. So kidney cannot dilute a urine. When it cannot dilute a urine, it cannot excrete more water. It cannot correct its hyponatremia on its own. So the commonest cause of drug-induced hyponatremia is thiazide diuretic. That is the point you should remember. Then a big list of drugs can cause euvolemic hyponatremia by various mechanisms, usually by acting at the level of the collecting duct, where they cause some amount of antidiuretic hormone-like activity, or they potentiate the action of ADH, try to reabsorb more water when osmolality is already little low, so they can cause hyponatremia. The list is big. Commonly used drugs: carbamazepine, oxycarbamazepine, very commonly used, anticonvulsant drugs like vincristine, cyclophosphamide. Long list of antidepressants, amitriptyline, antipsychotic, haloperidol. All this can create problem. Long-term use of NSAIDs, and even paracetamol. Long-term high dose can result in hyponatremia. So the list is even bigger, but I have given the commonly used drug, especially antipsychotic drug, antidepressants, and anticonvulsant, anti-malignant drugs. These drugs you should always keep in mind because these drugs can be causing hyponatremia. Having eliminated thyroid and cortisol deficiency and having eliminated certain drug-induced problem, next you think in terms of syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. SAADH is a big category. Somebody, if they are having a known disease, say a patient with a stroke or a patient with a CNS problem, yes, it is easy to diagnose, but sometimes it is a little difficult, especially some occult malignancy. It's not easily picked up. Sometimes we keep on evaluating somebody with recurrent hyponatremia, we may pick up some malignancies. The three groups which causes SAADH. One is malignancy, commonly lung malignancy, because lung disease itself can produce SAADH, lung malignancy. Then upper GI malignancy, mostly duodenum, of course can happen with stomach and so on. Pancreatic malignancy, some leukemias, lymphomas, they can also produce SAADH, that is malignancy. Second category is a chronic lung disorders. Chronic lung disorders like PT with fibrosis, bronchiectasis, of course lung tumor, primary, secondary. So if they are present for a long time, they can produce a problem. Any lung disease. So anybody with unexplained hyponatremia, you must X-ray test is a must. You may pick up some lesions which is not noticed earlier. Then of course CNS, because we know it is basically at the hypothalamus posterior pituitary axis. So encephalitis, meningitis, trauma, intracerebral bleed, tumor in the brain. So all these things can produce SAADH. So they can produce high ADH secretion, or sometimes they just potentiate the action of ADH. ADH level may be low, or they just potentiate the action of ADH on the collecting duct, or they produce some peptide with structural similarity with an antidiuretic hormone. Thereby they can cause more water reabsorption. So anyway, SAADH is a big category which you should keep in mind. Now, next is going further, treatment of hyponatremia. We have picked up somebody who is having, so far I have said, what is hyponatremia? You get a low sodium, rule out pseudohyponatremia, you rule out translocational hyponatremia. Then you pick up hyponatremia. Then see the volume status. Hypervolemic, easy to diagnose. Three important conditions, CCF, cirrhosis, and nephrotic syndrome. Hypovolemic hyponatremia also usually easy to diagnose because usually there will be history, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, burns, some acute abdomen, pancreatitis, and so on. So that is also easy. The problem will come with euvolemic hyponatremia, where I said eliminate thyroid problem, eliminate cortisol deficiency, then you think in SAADH, and then you come to a conclusion. Now coming to the treatment. Why should you treat a patient with hyponatremia? Because it is a life-threatening condition. As I said earlier, it can become mild, moderate, severe. When it is severe, it can become convulsion, coma, and patient may die. In front of your eye, patient may die. So you have to treat this particular patient. So who should be treated promptly? That is patient with acute hyponatremia. That is who have developed hyponatremia very rapidly. So first day when they are admitted, they had a sodium of say 138. So 2 days later become drowsy. You find their sodium is only 120 due to some reason. So symptomatic, so you have to treat aggressively. Or a chronic hyponatremia who came to you with a little drowsiness, somebody on thiazide for a long time. You do a sodium is a 100, 98 and so on. So their level is too low, so you have to admit them and you have to treat them. So acute hyponatremia, always treat very aggressively. Chronic hyponatremia, if it is too symptomatic, again you have to treat aggressively. But when you treat very aggressively, you develop what you call it as central pontine myelinosis. Why it happens, we'll see in the next slide. So to prevent this, we always treat little slower. And we don't try to increase the sodium not more than 8 to 10 milliequivalent per liter in a day. For example, somebody has come admitted with a sodium of 100. Next day, my target is only 108 or maximum 110. I am not targeting 140. 140 is the normal. Maximum 24 hours, I would like to have 108, 110. Next 24 hours, another 5, 6. So if the patient is symptoms getting better, I will go very, very slowly. Because if I get this complication, that is central point in myelinosis, it produces the irreversible neurological damage. Patient will be bedridden for lifelong. Now, how it happens? As I said earlier, a normal brain, you develop hyponatremia. Immediately what happens? The brain tries to enter. So immediately that brain has to adapt. So it starts pushing out sodium, potassium, chloride. That is the first step. Then they send out all myo-inositol, inositol, taurine and other things. That is a osmolytes send out. And over a period of time, brain get a balance so that it prevents cerebral edema. The person's serum sodium is constantly coming down, but brain does not develop edema. It's a little safeguarding itself, but the hyponatremia gets further worsened, so you may get symptoms. When you treat it very aggressively, what happens? The brain goes for a there is a rapid dehydration which happens in the brain. So there is it will cause a osmotic demyelination. The worst part to be affected will be the central portion of the pons. That is where all tractor is going, reticular activity system is there. So when it is affected, you get a problem. So we have to treat very slowly so that you give time for the brain to bring in electrolytes, bring in its osmolytes. Slowly it also adapts. As the osmolality outside is increased, brain cells also should increase their osmolality. And once it gets normal, it should also get back to its original state. So you should give time for the brain to react. It takes time. So first it will pick up sodium, it will pick up potassium, then it will start generating the osmolytes. So always you correct hyponatremia very slowly. Otherwise you get a irreversible complication. What are the treatment options available? If it is hypovolemic hyponatremia, somebody who had diarrhea, vomiting diarrhea, you find sodium is only 128. Patient BP is low, severely volume depleted. Treatment IV saline. Of course, if it is diarrhea with electrolyte imbalance, you have to give ringarectate also. Anyway, that also contain almost same amount of sodium like that normal saline. So treatment is give normal saline. Hypovolemic hyponatremia, correct the volume depletion, give sodium. If the kidney is normal, kidney will correct the sodium. It will reabsorb, take up more sodium. It will eliminate more water. So thereby it will correct the hyponatremia. So somebody with a sodium of say 128, 130, if it is hypovolemic, the treatment is only normal saline. You give normal saline, that itself kidney will regulate. If the kidney is diseased, it's a problem. Otherwise, kidney will regulate, it will reabsorb more sodium, the less water, so thereby it will correct the hyponatremia. So 3% sodium chloride, another drug which is available in the market, 3% sodium chloride. Normal saline, you will have 0.9% sodium. This is a concentrated sodium chloride available in 100 ml bottle. Very rarely indicated in hypovolemia unless if the patient is too symptomatic. Otherwise, generally we don't use 3% normal saline. Next, hypervolemic hyponatremia. In hypervolemic hyponatremia, as I said earlier, CCF, cirrhosis, nephrotic syndrome, where the treatment is basically water restriction. Ask the patient to restrict the water. Most of the time, they would have been advised to restrict water. In spite of that, they would have been continue to drink more water. So always restrict to 100 ml, or in acute phase, even you reduce it to even 600 or 700 ml per day. You reduce the water intake very drastically, and you have to use a loop diuretic. Loop diuretic will produce more excretion of salt, we know. Diuretics acts by eliminating salt. Along with that, it eliminates water. Loop diuretic will eliminate more salt. Along with that, more water will go. In spite of this individual is having hyponatremia, we are using a drug which will eliminate more sodium. No choice, because along with that, you have to send out the water. In the diet, you restrict the water so that slowly this edema also comes down. Hyponatremia also slowly improves. So in patient with hypervolemic hyponatremia, even though they have hyponatremia, the treatment is going to be a loop diuretic, which will cause elimination of sodium from the body. Along with, of course, the water restriction will be the mainstay. That is hypervolemic hyponatremia. Of course, treat the basic cause, everything, nephrotic syndrome, steroid, cardiac failure, all these drugs and so on. Third is euvolemic hyponatremia. This euvolemic hyponatremia, again, very often they are asymptomatic. Very often they are very asymptomatic, so you can go slowly. Even if they are symptomatic, correct it only for the first 1 or 2 days aggressively. Once they become conscious oriented, you start treating them very slowly. Don't give aggressive treatment for a very long time. Euvolemic hyponatremia, if they have walked in some OP patient on some psychiatric drugs, 125 sodium, some tiredness, you can just manage them even as an outpatient just by restricting water and probably taking a little extra salt. But salt may not help much. like that of water restriction. But if they are acutely symptomatic, then you have to use a 3% sodium chloride. When you use 3% sodium chloride, you are going to give 3 grams of salt. 3% means 3 grams of salt in 100 ml. Normally you use 0.9% sodium chloride. 0.9% sodium chloride in 500 ml will have 4.5 grams of salt, that is sodium chloride. This 3% in 100 ml it will have 3 grams of salt. When you use a 3% sodium chloride, yes, the sodium level will come up transiently rapidly. But the idea is, as I said earlier, not giving sodium. We want to eliminate water from the body. So along with 3% sodium chloride, you use injection furosemide. There are a lot of formulas are available. One thing which roughly what they say is 150 ml of 3% sodium chloride. 150 ml of 3% sodium, that is means 4.5 gram of salt in 150 ml of water. Along with furosemide 1 milligram per kilogram body weight. For example, somebody weighing 60 kg, you give 60 milligram of furosemide, and along with 4.5 gram of salt in 150 ml of water. This 4.5 gram of salt will come out in with say 1000 ml of water. In other words, by giving this combination, that 4.5 gram of salt, whatever you have given in, you will bring it out through kidney. It will be eliminated with more water, with 1 liter water. That means you will be losing 850 ml of free water. So that way you eliminate free water from the body, thereby the sodium comes up. I repeat, 3% sodium chloride is given generally with furosemide. Very rarely we give it alone, but generally it is given with furosemide. Idea is you give salt with less water. By giving furosemide, you bring out that salt with more water. So thereby the net free water should be lost. So that is the idea of giving 3% sodium chloride. Otherwise, you have to be little careful, because if you use inadvertently, you can create central spontaneous myelosis. You can repeat this particular dose every 6th hourly or even 8th hourly in a day. So 3-4 times you can use this drug. But when you are using it repeatedly, when the patient is too sick, probably you have to measure sodium every 4th hourly and adjust. If the sodium is coming up fast, stop this drug for a few hours, then you restart. Okay. Somebody recurrently goes for SAIDH, symptomatic SAIDH, has got a disease which may not be completely cleared, say some chronic lung problem or some malignancy which can only be palliatively treated. Recurrently he goes for hyponatremia. So what else we can do? Olden days we were using demeclocycline. This is a tetracycline derivative which acts by sensitizing the collecting duct for the suppressing the activity of the ADH. Lithium also will have similar action, but they are all little toxic. Nowadays we have got a better drug, that is what we call as vasopressin receptor antagonist. That is, you don't want the vasopressin to act. So only when the vasopressin acts on the collecting duct, it starts reabsorbing water. We don't want the vasopressin to act. So you use a drug which will inhibit the vasopressin receptor. There are many types of vasopressin receptor. This is what we call as V2 receptor, is the one which is present in the collecting duct. You block that drug, block that receptor, so that the ADH, you may have more ADH, still it cannot cause this aquaporin channel will not be inserted into the collecting duct cells, and water absorption can be prevented. So you may lose more free water. Of that, 2 drugs are available. One is Ponivaptan, other one is Talvaptan. Ponivaptan is available as injection, but the Talvaptan oral drug freely available and little expensive, but we use fairly in our routine practice. You can start with 50 milligram in a day. You can go up to 30 milligram twice a day. This is a very useful drug in somebody with a chronic hyponatremia with a primary problem which cannot be completely corrected. So it's a very useful drug. So to sum up, somebody has got hyponatremia. If they are asymptomatic, you always go slow. So chronic asymptomatic, so no immediate correction. But if they are acute, so you would have to do emergency correction. As I said earlier, hypertonic saline, that is 3% sodium chloride, 1 ml per kilogram body weight per hour. So if somebody is 50 kg, you give 50 ml every hour, along with furosemide. Of course, as I said, if you want to repeat it, you have to be very careful. One more problem with this combination is you may develop hypokalemia. Because you are using a lot of furosemide, you may get hypokalemia. And if you are using it for a longer time, you may even have autotoxicity. But otherwise, it is very useful in acute setup. Chronic hyponatremia, if it is symptomatic at that time of presentation, you can use hypertonic saline for a day or 2, and then you slowly can switch over to long-term management. You can go for a vasopressin V2 receptor antagonist. That is your Talvaptan. Of course, democlocycline, lithium nowadays we almost stop using. Main point is you have to restrict water. In anybody with gets recurrent attacks of hyponatremia, you have to restrict water. So that is the most important thing you should do it. Okay, that is I come to the end of my lecture. Any questions you can ask. But basic point to remember, hyponatremia is not a sodium disorder, it is a water disorder. You must have some idea about the how ADH is acting and so on. Little easy to understand. Ready for the exam. Yeah, before you start reading. Otherwise, you totally get confused. Yeah.
Sir,
Hypovolemia and hypervolemia, you talk about volume, but actually that is sodium status. If somebody is hypovolemic, treatment is sodium, not just water. Like, if I talk on hypovolemia, I will talk about sodium, not with water. Okay. So similarly, hypervolemia means they have got more.
Hello.
yes, sir.
Yeah. So is the same link now for this class as well?
Yes, sir. This is the same link, sir. Sir, can we wait for 2 more minutes? Some more people might join.